Day 485 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia is sitting on more than 223,000 military personnel losses. Then as we take a look at the hardware losses, so 4 tanks, 15 APVs, and a whopping, truly astonishing 44 artillery losses there, which is an all-time record high as far as Russian artillery losses go for any single day. And in fact, the previous high was of the amount of 40, which happened quite recently too, just at the end of May, as shown by this now older graphic. And of note, there is a clear upwards trajectory in motion. And then we'll head back to the map today, and for once we'll skip past Russia and the never-ending Nation of Flames that place is, just for a day. And not because there weren't any fires, quite the opposite really, but this time it was just shopping centres going up in flames instead, which was likely an insurance fraud job as a way for shop owners to circumvent Russia's hurting economic pain, ultimately because of sanctions due to their invasion into Ukraine. So we're really going to start out in Belarus today, as a Russian Mi-24 helicopter appeared to have crash landed about 150 kilometers north of the Ukrainian border. And not due to any military engagements, not in this region certainly, but for what appears to instead be as a result of a lack of maintenance. Now, the Belarusian officials declined to state whether this was a Russian or Belarusian chopper, but you can see the chopper sporting the Z symbol smack bang right there. Plus, locals on the scene confirmed Russian piloting of the aircraft as well. Then we'll head over to the Ukrainian map, as overnight, Ukraine shot down 13 out of 13 cruise missiles launched by Russia into its territory, in what was no doubt, at least in part, a retaliatory strike against Ukraine after the AFU struck the Chonhar Bridge leading into Crimea, but more on that shortly. Also taken out was a drone, which is in fact a trailing recon drone, which always attempts to sneak a peek to see if it hit anything of military strategic value. Then we'll head across specifically to the Donbass now, as there are reports that Ukrainian forces near Bakhmut are working in the area of Berkivka, just to the north there, and in fact approaching the main E40 MO3 highway, which would work to further cut communication and supply lines to Dubovo, Vasilivka, right there. I have to really zoom in for that one. And let's zoom out for a bit of context. As you'll see, Ukrainian moves like these threaten a complete encirclement of Russian forces to the west. So it's certainly turning into a precarious position for the Russian units stationed at that location right now. Oh, and it's worth a mention that Ukrainian units that are conducting all of these counteroffensive operations in the region right now, but in the Bakhmut region in particular, have been pleasantly surprised of the outcome so far, as they say they overestimated the Russian forces and underestimated themselves. Which are truly some decent words to live by in any competitive field you find yourself in, not the least of which would be a war or a battlefield. Then we'll move down south in the Donetsk region, as Ukrainian loitering munitions continue to make Marinka a highly hazardous environment to Russian vehicles, including the Buhanka vans. So zoom in, so around this location here. So the Buhanka vans, aka the Scooby-Doo vans. And interesting fact, the word Buhanka in Russia stands for loaf, as the vans were thought to resemble a loaf of bread. And they also contain about as much heavy armor as a loaf of bread as well. Just a shocking inclusion into the Russian military. But perhaps the best news to come out of this area today is in the area just north of Marinka. So we'll zoom in there, where the AFU has penetrated more than 1 kilometer deep in the last 24 hours, and we'll go back and forth on the date map to show you that. And so destroying some Russian defensive lines in the process. Which is even more impressive considering that these were Russian defensive lines held by Russian troops since 2014 with all of those Donbass engagements. Then, near this location, another Russian T-90M tank was eliminated. This one just happened to roll over a clearly visible mine in what continues to be a show of fresh, new, inexperienced Russian tankies taking the wheel of heavy armor, which just continues to show the never-ending, frightening ineptitude of the Russian forces, particularly in this southeast corner. And do note, as a reminder, the T-90M is the absolute best main battle tank Russia has to offer in this war. And as for all available T-90 variants Russia had just prior to the commencement of this war on 24th of February last year, they might have had maybe up to 200 to 300 available. And that's actually being extremely generous given how this war has panned out, given their notable absence during the invasion. And of that amount, whatever it is, as limited as it may really potentially be, the AFU has collectively captured or destroyed nearly 100 of them now. 100 T-90 variants. So truly a finite resource for Russia in this war of attrition that Russia mistakenly got itself into. Then somewhere else in the east, around the Donetsk Oblast, the 110th Mechanized Brigade of the AFU successfully targeted a Russian ammunition storage unit, resulting in a large explosion of numerous munitions just cooking off. And this one is actually quite a fairly long video with quite the ongoing and unabated cook-off. And then we'll move to the southern front lines here today, and I'll keep it pretty simple for updates on the south front today. But what I've been wanting to mention recently, so a few days ago, when a Russian battalion attempted to perform a counteroffensive to take back land in the since liberated Piaty they actually happened to post some before and after shots on social media. So in the post, they showed how they started out with a 300 strong battalion of soldiers, and then, after all of those well-reported failing Russian counteroffensives, they went down from 300 to just 16, getting completely decimated in the process. And that's in their own words as well on social media. So from a battalion size to a small platoon size, which is just astonishing and completely unsustainable for any military. And also, so we are coming across more and more pieces of Ukrainian captured equipment by the Ukrainian forces. Something I otherwise used to call loot or war loot in a segment there from previous successful AFU advances in Kherson and Kharkiv. Because taking a look at this, for instance, this happy chap, Ukrainian, taking back a BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicle. But sadly, we're not probably going to see anywhere near as much loot like we used to, as with all of those previous successful Ukrainian advances. And that's not because the Russian army is super amazing and careful with resources, quite the opposite actually, as it's rather because of Russia's exhaustive loss of these vehicles already and extremely slow production capacity for all of those light and heavy armored vehicles throughout this war. Simply put, they're running out. And there is countless photographic evidence of destroyed Russian hardware to support these types of claims. Meanwhile, online Russian trolls love to spread this false narrative that Russia is sort of like, quote-unquote, saving their best for last. But this 3-day war has lasted over a year now, well over a year, so whenever last is or was, probably should have happened a long time ago. Oh, and in this region, I would be remiss not to mention the Russian Telegram channel's claims of breakthrough engagements of the Ukrainian forces through the trenches at the Russian controlled settlement of Robotyne. In fact, the some Ukrainian sources posted a photo of previously abandoned Bradleys and Leopard tanks, so abandoned over a week ago, for instance, and this photo is from 48 hours ago, back into the region, which they appear to now very much have access to. So back to the workshop they go. And it might seem surprising that Russia didn't, for instance, A, tow back the Leopard to the Red Square in Moscow for propaganda purposes, or B, finish off the vehicles, but that's because they simply couldn't. As they didn't control the area where they are or were, no one did. Then we'll head on down south and we'll get to some of the bigger news for today. Well, it actually just happened outside of 24 hours ago now, as the AFU performed a storm shadow strike on the Chonhar Bridge. Now, this is actually right on the edge between Kherson and Crimea. We have to zoom in, so this location there, which is actually quite a key logistics route for Russian equipment headed to Kherson and the Zaporizhia front lines. And as far as the Russian forces are concerned, this bridge single-handedly carries 70% of supplies from Russian-occupied Crimea to those aforementioned front lines to support the Russian war machine. So just simply staggering. Which means for now, the alternate routes Russia needs to take are longer, slower, and more susceptible to closer range strikes from Ukrainian forces, as they have to travel up Armyansk and go around to get to Zaporizhia, Melitopol, all of those sorts of places there. As realistically, you've only got two ways in and out. So on the west, Armyansk, and on the east, at the Chonhar Bridge. So everything else is unstable. You couldn't even argue for the edges there. There's just really two major choke points to and from Crimea, which isn't a helpful situation for Russia to be in. And you know what? Russia's immediate response? Well, the Russian-installed puppet government leader of Kherson threatened that Russia will blow up the bridge connecting Romania and Moldova. Because that totally makes sense. Bear in mind, Romania is a NATO member, all of which is probably causing multiple Eastern European NATO countries to salivate at the idea of invoking NATO Article 5. And it's all very interesting because for Ukraine to strike this bridge 18 days into the Ukrainian counteroffensive would lead one to hypothesize that it was a military strike lying in wait, ready to pounce when the moment was just right, just as Russia's reliance on such logistics or logistical routes was at its most crucial or critical for the time. So in the upcoming days and weeks, we're probably likely to see this strike put a bit of a damper on things for the Russian forces. Then we'll head across to some news for today, so just a little bit, but in what might be Wagner PMC boss Prigozhin's most scathing indictment of the failures of the Russian army so far. So he went on one of those telephone rants once again, but this time to say that there's a whole long laundry list of things, but that Russia is losing huge pieces of land to the AFU's counteroffensive. Also that the Russian army has no management or weapons or ammo, and that Russian soldiers are writing letters every day for more ammo of various types. He says the Ukrainian army will take back all Russian gains from the so-called SMO, Special Military Operation. Also that Kherson's front line is crumbling, and that it's a 4-minute rant. And then more importantly, that the truth of the Russian army's failures are being hidden to the people in Russia. So regular Russians don't know about the failures there. And he also goes on to say that Crimea will be taken back by the AFU, but also that Russian commanders are just sending nice-looking reports back up the chain to the Kremlin to give a completely distorted view of reality, of the battlefield, to Uncle Putin, which I've been hammering on about for so long now. So thanks for backing me up on that one, Prego. Then he goes on to say, if it all keeps going this way, that even Russia will be completely lost itself. He even says that the cost of the special military operation is the total destruction of the Russian army. So, in a word, demilitarization. And we already know this, but it's just a lag in time for both the Russian leaders and the Russian population at large before they come to terms with this and stop supporting the war that's running their own country into the ground irrevocably. And that'll be it today, guys. I'll throw in a quick funny, not the funniest, but it is in line with some of my sense of humor tactics there. So, as Russian state TV awkwardly discussed potential reparations to pay Ukraine, and performs a lot of mental gymnastics in these conversations. But it's not without its toilet humor, as one of the panelists calls it like it is, saying how Russians don't have the same living standards as the West do, and that tens of millions of Russians still don't have indoor plumbing. So yeah, sort yourself out first, Russia, before trying to do something like this on the world stage. You are a broken system. So thanks for watching today, guys. Please leave a comment, subscribe. Thanks again for all those subscribing and likes and comments, and above all, the support that keeps me going. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.